Sure, I'll introduce myself. I'm Brian Grossman. I'm editor-in-chief of the Colorado Springs Independent and the Colorado Springs Business Journal.
I'm Amy Gillentine. I'm the executive editor and publisher of the publishing house here, which includes seven papers.
I'm Helen Lewis. I'm managing editor of the Indy and the Business Journal, and I'm going to be asking the questions today. And Glenn's here too, isn't he?
Yes.
I can't see him though.
Just arrived. Hi, Glenn Wallace. I'm the editor of the Southeast Express newspaper.
Great.
Good to meet you all.
Good to meet you. Amy, my screen is, wait a second, I'm just going to do something with my screen.
Okay.
I'm having trouble seeing John. Okay. Here we go. Okay. All right, thanks, John. Just everybody here today is on the editorial board. Just wanted to start with that. And if you can start with telling us about yourself and your background.
Okay, well, I'm a retired Army intelligence officer, served 27 years, started out in the Marine Corps, then got out, went to college, got a degree in Russian because I was studying to become a Soviet analyst. Upon graduation, I was recruited into Army intelligence, worked there the rest of my career. And last job I did was at US Northcom, NORAD and Northcom. It's a combined joint command. You do both. And I think I finished up as the Deputy Chief of Staff to the Intelligence Directorate at US Northcom. And then got out, did a little bit of contracting work, military contracts, and now I'm pretty much fully retired. I do a little bit of volunteer consulting with some of the stuff going on in Eastern Europe right now. And so, but my priority now is running on the sheriff's campaign because I was asked to run by some Army officers who kind of knew some of the background of things I did while I was in the Army that would really help El Paso County in their sheriff's department.
Can you tell us what background or experience you have in law enforcement?
My background in law enforcement is working the interagency piece of it, specifically with agencies like the FBI, DEA, Justice Department, things like that. So I bring a skill set that is really not present in any of the other candidates and is something that is actually pretty important for El Paso County when you look at how tied in our county is to the federal defense infrastructure.
Do you have a post certification?
No, I do not. I will get that once elected though. So
if you had to give the relationship between the sheriff's office and the public it serves a grade, what would that be and why?
the current sheriff's office, I don't think I'm in a position to give the grade, but the feedback I get from people who are supporting me is that the sheriff's department has issues of response times, of ignoring concerned citizens when they raise issues, things like that. I mean, there's obviously stuff in the jail that is a very grave concern to, I think, most people in this community.
Can you talk a bit more about that? We've been covering and following the mental health crisis in jails. what's your take on that, and what are you looking at as solutions?
What I'm looking at is there seems to be a lack of just acknowledging basic human rights of people. And it's something that in one of the reasons I was asked to run is someone brought up when they were talking to me, another Army officer, of the work I did early in the Iraq War, where the command I was associated, which was this, I was an intelligence officer for the Special Forces, and this is 2004, and the issue of Abu Ghraib had already occurred, and it was a big scandal, Army-wide, DoD-wide, and our incoming commander, who was a Special Forces officer, pulled us all together as a staff because we just gotten there, and we're like, we need to fix this, was his statement. And so we need to treat our own, because we had our own detention facilities, we had our own prisoners that we were capturing. And his attitude was to do everything in accordance with the law, the rule of law, international law, human rights law. And we did that. And really, we were the start, our command, of correcting what had gone on in Iraq. And it was, because you have to remember, when back in that time when that story broke and the journalists were covering it, many of us thought the entire Iraq endeavor was a lost cause, that we had lost the war based on just the abusing of detainees. And it was a high hill to climb to get out of that and actually start treating detainees humanely. And then, oddly enough, the people who had been treated well, who had been in detainment, started actually having a better attitude for the Americans, and things changed. And it was, the beginning that would eventually lead to things like the Sunni awakening and other things that did help our efforts in Iraq. And I don't want to turn this into an interview on the history of the Iraq War, but there are things that we learn the hard ways, and there were hard things we had to do to fix what went on. And I believe that's what we need in El Paso County. We need to take a hard look at how we treat our detainees humanely, fairly, and with human rights. And it's amazing because I've talked to Republicans don't even, the ones I talk to, don't even acknowledge a concept of human rights. They will immediately change the subject off of human rights, and they fail to acknowledge it.
In terms of prisons, do you mean, or more broadly?
More broadly. And my concern, other than your reporting that your organization has done about the jail, it almost never gets covered in this town. There's a lack of empathy in our community about it, which is, I find, sad. But then there's also the factor of just what is going on in the jail. How are they, it's just, it begs the question, and we need to dive deep into what's going on there. How do they run their policies? What are their procedures? All this stuff that they teach us in the Army is, as an officer, you go off to staff college and you learn how to do, policies and procedures, and how to go into an organization, assess it, see where things need to be corrected. If things are very ethically broken, you do right there, stop everything. You do like a safety stand down. When things go on in the military and there's something that's, people die of an accident, they do a safety stand down. What just happened here? We need to make immediate corrections. That you don't get from other candidates. I'm not going to talk ill about the people running it now. I don't know what they're dealing with. I do know that you have some of these constitutional sheriff types who have no vested interest in what goes on to any of those detainees. So.
Do you think there's a staffing shortage? And if so, where is the shortage and how do you begin to fix that?
Well, first I need to be in there. I need to get in there to look at it. I'm not gonna talk about really the staff because when you get in there, you have to do an assessment. How many people do I have at this time? Where are they? And again, I'm not, as a candidate, I'm not going to dive down into every little nook and cranny because one, I don't have full access to the organization. I could go online and read some stuff, but I need full access once elected, go in there, do a full-blown assessment, probably a 60 and 90-day look. And again, if there's things immediately going on that I need to address, they would be addressed. But I do a 60 to 90-day assessment. Where are our staffing shortage? I know people who've helped my campaign who used to work there and they quit because of, bad working conditions, bad, practices, bad general, what we call in the Army command climate seems to be an issue. But again, I have to get in there and start looking at things, looking at systems. So
You mentioned that you'd been asked to run by people who were pointing to issues with the way things are run at the moment, and you touched on some of those. Can you expand on that a little bit? Was that the whole list of issues that they raised?
Well, I was asked to run because people knew my other military officers who knew my record of what I'd done with the helping with the Iraq detainment thing, and then going on to actually in other venues, like when I was an advisor with the Iraqi army and police forces on training them to treat their people in detainment humanely and with human rights. That was a big issue of mine. And I did 2 separate tours doing that. I did 2 tours doing that and 2 tours previous with the special forces in Iraq. Then there was other things where I've been involved in earlier in my career with the drug war, working with the DEA, FBI, Justice Department. And so they knew I had that capability. And so they thought that I would be a good candidate to get into the sheriff's race. Now, I will say this has been a recurring theme because I was asked to run in 2018. But then when we got to the county assembly, it was determined, we looked at the rules, and according to the state Colorado Democratic Party, you have not been a registered Democrat long enough to run as our candidate. And so they asked me to withdraw my name, and they put another young lady up there to run instead. But, because the thing was I had been a Republican before that. And so, they weren't willing to change their rules to let me run as a former Republican in the Democratic Party for El Paso County. So, and then
why did you switch from Republican to Democrat?
Because it has become, and you guys, I think, have reported on this, the El Paso County Republicans, one, they're not conservative. They are actually more kind of a radical libertarian slant to their political party. Very little, and I always pick on the media because you should not be calling anyone who's a Republican anymore conservative. And I take heat from this on the Democratic side because I'm actually running as a conservative Democrat because I'm a very conservative person. But I happen to be a Democrat because Republicans ceased being conservative years ago, and they opted for the radical libertarian angle. So
Let's talk about jail deaths. We've had 11 people have died in the custody of El Paso County since January 2020. Tell us your feelings about that, and also how you would start to approach rectifying that.
Well, this gets into kind of what we already touched on, and it is looking at the policies and procedures. And I'll use the example going back to Iraq, because I think it's a fitting one, and that is we had some Iraqi detainees die in custody, and it was odd because at first our medical folks couldn't figure it out, and people thought, okay, something nefarious happened. And then as we did an investigation, it was determined that because the folks that we were going after and putting in detainment, we were doing high level former Saddam Ba'athist individuals running the insurgency against the US force in Iraq. These gentlemen and they were all gentlemen, they were all in excess of, maybe 50, 60 years old, 70, some of them. And what we found out is we would capture these guys, put them in detainment, they'd be there and they would clam up, they weren't going to say a word, but they didn't have their medication, because most of these guys were suffering from things like diabetes, heart conditions. Some had all sorts of different ailments. And our surgeon told us, hey, these guys, they died because of these things. We need to correct this. And so we had to train the special forces teams that when you go do a raid and you capture someone, you look around their place and bag up all their medication and bring their medication with them, with all the stuff. You capture their cell phone and any kind of, recording devices, and bring their medication too, because we're going to start giving these guys their medication in detainment. And lo and behold, our death rate ceased from that point. So that is just, you have to look at the factors that are leading to this. And granted, I don't know what the factors are in the jail. Sorry about that. But it's something that needs to be addressed. It's, there's a cause and effect that's going on that we can fix it if we just know all the factors, and then we're allowed to address the factors.
What are your thoughts on red flag laws?
Red flag laws. Oh, that's a great topic. I was listening to one of the candidates, and I'm not going to throw them under the bus here, but they bragged that El Paso County Sheriff's Office has never enforced the red flag bill. And this was a bragging. Now, my take is that it's the law. And as a sheriff, I should not be using my personal opinion about the law to enforce laws. If it's a law that was passed by a duly elected legislature, I'm going to enforce that law. And that goes to any law that's on the books, that's passed, that needs to be. It shouldn't be up to a law. And this is where I differ greatly with the folks who are running as constitutional sheriffs, where they say that it's unconstitutional and that they are not going to enforce it because they happen to be some internet constitutional scholar and they want to claim that this law isn't valid. I believe they are wrong. And as the sheriff, you need to be applying the law as it stands fairly to everybody.
Let's talk about CSPD investigations of El Paso County Sheriff's Office and vice versa. Is that a good idea?
Well, I think what you're getting at is, I haven't heard that the CSPD is investigating El Paso County Sheriff and Sheriff doing them. I believe there might be, when something happens in one area, you should have maybe some other outside agency look at it, I would, I think if we had real, true transparency, that this wouldn't be an issue, and that we need to strive for transparency and actual real transparency. So,
What efforts would you make towards transparency, towards increasing that?
well, I would use my experience. I used to do for much of my career, I was a FOIA officer, where I would do the paperwork. I would review Freedom of Information Acts. I did this for the Special Forces. I did it for US Northcom, actually. And I would review them and I would submit them back to people who are submitting them. And I was always told, by my leaders and this is, might come as a surprise, but leaders in the intelligence community is like, hey, when you have a FOIA request, don't try and, snowball it or try and roadblock people. Give them what they're asking, do your review, make sure you're not giving away classified information, but you still give them the information they are seeking in a lawful manner and to build public trust in our institutions. And that's, I would apply the same rules.
From the outside looking in, what would you change about operations and what do you think's working well?
What I would change, I'll kind of look at that first. I have some law enforcement officers who've been, advising my campaign. And I really was stunned when I found this, is that I've been a big advocate for just within the US military and the veterans community about PTSD awareness. And talking to law enforcement, they have like almost no support on that front. And they tell me some of the stories of things they deal with, of, dealing with, young people who've taken their lives and, then dealing with, all sorts of other crimes and conflicts that we take for granted on a daily basis, domestic violence stuff. And they have real PTSD issues within the law enforcement community. And that's something that I would address. It's a certain amount because here's the thing is that if you don't address officer wellness, because that's a term we use in the military, we look at soldier wellness. If they're not being taken care of mentally, even physically, are they staying in shape and stuff, then you risk having all the other negative impacts that come out of that. And look at the, I guess, social emotional welfare we sometimes codify it as. That's an area that I really want to look at. And then other areas that are, well, there's a whole education piece I want to get into, but I'll talk later at that. But what's working well? I don't know. I don't hear a lot that is going well with the sheriff's office. I don't want to say it's all bad news. I mean, there's hardworking people doing their job every day. I think they've done well on the on some of the fire crises that have occurred throughout El Paso County. They've been responsive with that. They put out the alerts update. I mean, I've been out there driving around the county out in the rural area and I get the update. Oh, there's a fire several miles down the road. And now you know that it's there and you can be aware of it. I think they've actually done very good on that front.
Next question is about slow response times, which you touched on, I think is one of the concerns that were raised when you were considering running. How would you go about tackling that?
Well, slow response rates, you have to look at one, it kind of needs to be broken down. This is where we talk about analyzing systems, because there might be a command and control aspect to it. Maybe not, maybe there is, but you have to still look at that. You also have to look at what we call, or what I'll call, troopers to task. How many tasks are going on for these, deputies or troopers or officers, law enforcement officers? Because when you're planning a military mission, you have to figure out, okay, can I actually accomplish this mission based on the amount of people I have? And where are most of my people? Now, my understanding is most of the people, the officers, are working in the jail. And that seems to be the priority for the sheriff's office, which to me makes a certain amount of sense. Then you get into, okay, how many officers do we now have who can respond out throughout the county? Because we know the county is actually very big. You drive out east, I leave my house and start moving east in my car. It's going to be a long drive, and it just takes a long response out there. Is there money to create things like substations? I've heard talk about putting a substation, or maybe it's already out there, in Falcon, but that's something that costs money. It costs resources. Is that something that the county government is willing to support? Because as sheriff, you have what you have, and you have to deal with your constraints and restrictions on your organization. At a certain point, I would argue it's not even a sheriff's issue as a county commissioner issue. Do the county commissioners want to help me increase response times? That at a certain level, it becomes their issue and not mine. I will work within whatever budget and resources I am granted, and I can dig down and see if there's ways to adjust things, move people around. But at the end of the day, much of the issues that people are raising is really a county commissioner issue.
What about the rise in crime? How do you go about tackling that?
The rise in crime, this I kind of alluded to with education, because I don't have all the ideas, but what I like to do is listen to the people who actually work in these jobs and what law enforcement officers have told me. And I'm not talking about the high level guys who make big political statements, go up to Denver and rant and want more budget and don't want to do stuff. I'm talking about officers actually doing their job every day. And they talk about the importance of engaging in education, actual crime prevention strategy that focuses on, one, education, especially education of young people. And then two, addressing, the incarcerated population, because they're tied. When you look at how the majority of the incarcerated population either don't have a high school degree, don't even have GEDs, don't have any kind of, just forget about college and stuff. They're just on the educational level, it's a disaster. And then they tell me, and this is coming from the officers, that most criminals most of the incarcerated population begin their criminal career at age 12. And at age 12, very often they are standing as a little kid before a judge dealing with some crime aspect. Now, getting after that is a tougher issue, but it's something that is worth the effort. And that is actually having some sort of program where we're teaching kids in school about, this is your life. If you commit a crime, and you can do training sessions on just what are the statistical crimes for kids at a certain level or a grade, and say, okay, you do something at this level, you're going to get this amount of time. That's going to affect you from this through the most of your early 20s and you're incarcerated. And oh, by the way, you've just missed out on the rest of your life. And your life is only going to be what? You're going to live to about what, 80 years old, maybe? And you've already thrown away the prime chunk of it right then and there. That is something that needs to be imparted on children and young people, you know, in an educational background, in a system. And that will go a long way towards crime prevention. Now, you gave me a great thing that just jogged my memory, because it's a very disconcerting to me. And you may not think it's related to the sheriff's office, but it goes back into reducing crime. And you see this going on at the local school boards. I know there's been a lot of discussion about the school boards in our community and the papers and stuff. But the thing that really concerns me is that there's this direct attack on the program of DEI, which is where our special needs kids go. Now, we know that a large portion of our incarcerated population are adults who used to be special needs kids, because special needs kids, as they grow up and they become teenagers and then young people, and then they're in their 20s, when they have those interactions with law enforcement and they haven't been properly, you know, their education has been maybe sidelined or ignored, they're going to have a very negative contact with law enforcement. And as we deconstruct and dismantle these DEI programs, we are going to have even more crime, because these young people are largely going to be abandoned now, are going to be put on this fast track to having bad things happen to them, whether it's negative impact with law enforcement or just doing stuff, getting involved in crime, and then adding to the increase in the incarcerated population.
Do you have other concerns apart from what we've touched on that you're aiming to address as priorities?
Another reason, well, this gets back to another reason I was asked to run, is that I've always, for over a decade now, been a leading advocate to counter the extremist elements in our society, whether they are the militia movement, there's a whole bunch of them that fall into that category. And that is another reason I think people reached out to me, because they understand the issue with these groups, their ties to law enforcement. I will give you a prime example. You guys ran a really great story back in, I want to say it was 2020, when there was a big Black Lives Matter rally downtown, and the CSPD turned a blind eye to a militia group setting up and doing all sorts of nefarious activity. And I was a candidate for House District 14 at the time. And I called out, you know, those militia members out publicly about that heinous act of doing that. And then I was immediately attacked. My website got something like 10,000 hits within the 3-day period of hostile stuff from different militia groups. And I was threatened with being hanged. I'm actually the first Colorado politician to be, threatened with hanging in the state, before the governor and the secretary of state. So, but that was back in 20. And what's amazing is that it was a very public discussion. I know it made the Colorado Times Recorder. There was a story on it. And never once did the CSPD ever come out and say, hey, did you just to ask me about it, as a citizen under threat, because I don't know, maybe they were so closely tied to the group that did it that they felt that they didn't need to, or I mean, just as a citizen, I was very, disappointed in the CSPD that they would just let something like that. One, the original incident, and then two, totally ignore threats being made to a public figure at the time. Really bothered me, but it's just something that I will always, I will always go after that issue. That's an important issue to me. I worked on it when I was actually in the Army, when I worked in recruiting command. I was probably the leading advocate to go after right-wing extremists in the military before it was even popular. Not that it's popular now, but it at least gets a little bit more news now. So does that get after your question?
It does. What's a mistake you've made, and how did you go about fixing it and learning from it?
Mistake I made is probably in the military there's been times where I've learned to become much more patient and understanding, even in like a combat zone with things blowing up around you, because if you just get angry, you can get angry at the wrong person at the wrong time. And so I've learned not to get angry about things and just, take a minute and think through, because generally when you get angry is when you make a mistake.
Why are you a better choice than the other candidates running for sheriff?
Okay, I think there are 4 Republicans. I know 2 of them I think 3 of them adhere to the constitutional sheriff ideology, which is extremely dangerous. I believe 3 of them belong to the CSPOA, the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officer Association, which, if you didn't know, that organization, which was created by Richard Mack, has ties to the Oath Keeper militia. And since I've been fighting with the Oath Keepers for a good decade now, more, that is something that I am adamantly opposed to, and none of those people who belong to that group have any, none of them should be in elected office at all. That alone disqualify them. The other candidate, Mr. Roybal, I've met him. He's an okay guy. I think that he's part of the system, and he doesn't have the wherewithal to look with fresh eyes and outside looking in to the organization. So, and again, I mean, he's effectively running the show right now. So all the negative things that are occurring are happening on his watch. And so if you want to continue that way of doing business, then people should re-elect or elect him. If you want to see change, the only change that's going to come in the sheriff's office is by electing me, because the constitutional sheriffs, you can just put them over there, and and then you got what's going on now, and then you got actual real change that would occur with me. So
with the constitutional sheriff's movement, you touched on that earlier, and when you say it's dangerous, can you expand on that a bit, maybe for people who don't understand what that movement is about?
Well, the movement is that a county sheriff has more power than the president of the United States, that they can say no to any federal law enforcement that comes into town or into the county and say, nope, not on my watch. I run this show. Now here's where, and I use the term dangerous because I use this very specifically, and that is, this is part of this is why I'm no longer Republican, because Republicans have adopted much of this ideology, and that is, it's an extreme form of anti-federalism. I tend to be a federalist. You know, the United States fought a war called the Civil War about the primacy of the federal government over states' rights. Well, you have these people now who are trying to relay this extreme anti-federalism under extreme, you know, states' rights beliefs. And I'll use the term, people don't like it when I say this, but people like constitutional sheriffs, they're basically a neo-Confederate organization. The Oath Keepers are a neo-Confederate militia group, along with the 3 Percenters. And I'll even throw out there the UADF, which is our own local chapter that has done a lot of nefarious stuff in this town, in the county. That's why they're dangerous, because they have an ideology that is vehemently opposed to the federal government, and that is never a good thing. And I would say it's very anti-American too.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Vote for me. I'm always looking for donors, fundraising, things like that, because worst case scenario, you have one of those constitutional sheriffs wins the election, and it's going to be one heck of a campaign season if that's the case. There'll be one. This is actually going to be the biggest campaign in the Springs of all the candidates. I don't want to. I mean, we've got a lot of great candidates out there running, but just the level of concern of either nothing being done, fixing the sheriff's office, or getting some radical extremists into the sheriff's office. And then, you know, I've said this to people, is that, just to put it in, you know, economic terms for the community, if one of the constitutional sheriffs who's anti-federal government gets elected as a county sheriff, what do you think that's going to tell the federal government, who has invested so much in this community with all the military bases? I mean, you can kiss that Space Command headquarters goodbye. Why would I, as President Biden, ever put a Space Command headquarters in Colorado Springs if you just elected a constitutional sheriff? I see a lot. And then what does it tell all the people who work for the federal government, that these people, and will there be any kind of repercussions to people who work for the federal government? Will there be a ceasing of working with the military law enforcement that on a daily basis? You have things like the Air Force AF Special Investigation Office. You have Army CID, Criminal Investigative Divisions. They work hand in hand. Will they stop working with those folks? Will crime start going unsolved if it involves, you know, crossing base property and county property? There's huge ramifications of this that I don't think people are even thinking about. And I try and talk to people about this. And I've talked to other newspapers in the community, and they've totally ignored most of my comments. And so that's what I'd like to leave you with. This campaign has huge, huge repercussions depending on how it goes.
Thanks so much, John. We are almost at the end of our time, but Amy, Brian, Glenn, are there any other questions?
I don't have any.
I just had one
Oh, go
really
ahead. Sorry.
quick. I'm sorry. Just in terms of day-to-day operations, especially since, you know, like you mentioned, the county is very large, and then there are several other local law enforcement agencies that the sheriffs would have to work with. What would you bring to the table in terms of that kind of day-to-day operation?
Day to day would be, that's actually something my thrive in, because, you know, I say I was an intelligence officer, but I had to work multiple roles as an operations officer. I had to run an operations for a brigade that dealt with 13 states on the East Coast of the United States, running day-to-day operations for that. I've done it, you know, operations officer on a combat deployment. Operations is something that I actually do very well in. I actually like that every single day you have a different crisis and going on, and you walk in an office and every day is a crisis, and you just, okay, let's deal with this. Okay, fix that one. Now we're on to the next one. So
Glenn, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you so much, John, for your time today. Brian, I don't actually quite know how to end the call, but I think that we're done. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, endorsements will be out in the Indy in June, so before the primary. But yeah, we appreciate your time.
all right, thank you very
All right,
much.
thanks, Sean. Bye-bye.
Thank you.